on our website at dailytelegraph.com.au. And staff and parents at Lidcombe Public School will fork out hundreds of thousands of dollars to install air conditioning. Labor claims the New South Wales government is refusing to add cooling units to the school during upcoming renovations. Now, live sheep exports will not be banned after the government received an independent review into the trade, which should be released tomorrow. On the line now is David Leyonhjelm, the Liberal Democrats crossbench senator, who also happens to be a vet. Good afternoon, David.
Hi, Miranda.
So it looks as if the government is going to tread a sensible line here between animal welfare and keeping the industry going. How do you think they've handled the issue?
Yeah, David Littleproud is actually a good minister, as far as I can tell. He seems to be more interested in evidence and facts and looking at the big picture rather than an emotional knee-jerk response, which we've seen a great deal of. In the end, also he's a National Party supporter, a member, representative, and a live export ban would have actually a very serious effect on the sheep sector, the sheep industry. About 30% of the offtake of sheep in Western Australia is for live export market. So killing off that would have the same sort of devastating effect on the sheep industry as what happened when Labor killed the live export cattle market to Indonesia when they were in power.
Yeah, it's incredible that Labor doesn't seem to have learned any lessons from that. They're still calling for a ban or a phase-out, really, which is the same thing. And we also have Susan Lee, the Liberal MP, who's still intending to move her private members' bill to phase out the ban, and she's now been joined by another Liberal MP, Sarah Henderson. Do you have any sense of how that will play out, this internal division?
Well, Labor is trying to outgreen the Greens on this issue. They see no downside. They quite like creating tension between the Nationals and the Liberals as well. So there's a sort of a political game going on with them, which is not all that related to the best interest of the animals or the sheep industry or principle or anything like that. So that's one thing. Susan Lee, I think she's responding with her heart, and her heart is not talking to her head. And I don't see why, and I don't quite understand why she thinks this is acceptable from an electoral point of view, really, because she represents a rural electorate. What happens to the price of sheep in Western Australia will inevitably affect the price of sheep in her electorate as well. Although not large numbers, relatively modest numbers of sheep go out of her electorate for live export, but lots of sheep go out of her electorate for other purposes, and the price of sheep is the price of sheep. So if the price plummets in Western Australia, it certainly won't stay up where it is in her electorate either. And Sarah Henderson, in Victoria, I think they renamed her electorate, was Corangamite. She's in a similar situation. It's a rural electorate. I think she's probably getting hundreds and hundreds of emails, like I am, and rather mistakenly assuming that that's majority public opinion.
So what are your emails telling you? To shut it down, it's cruel, sending you mean photos? And
yes, shutting it down is the message they're all saying. Of course, many of them are misguided. Some of them are animal rights focused. So the animal rights perspective is humans have no right to exploit animals for any purpose.
Even as pets?
That's right. Yeah, so the end result of their argument is we don't use animals for our pleasure, our companionship or anything like that, unless the animals choose us, because it amounts to slavery, basically. Animals have rights, and humans need to respect that. So that's the animal rights perspective. And of course, eating animals or using them for clothing or their skins for clothing, that sort of thing, that's obviously taboo. So they have no sympathy for the argument that the people in Kuwait and Qatar and Doha and those sort of places are entitled to eat our sheep for food. So they're quite happy to stop that.
I mean, it seems as if they're using the footage was horrendous. No one could watch those poor sheep suffering and, melted into puddles on the ground without feeling sympathy. But they're using that natural human sympathy to then get a wedge in for their campaign, which ultimately is to stop all of us from, having anything to do with animals, as you say.
Yes, that's right. What they're doing is confusing animal welfare and animal rights. As a veterinarian, I've always been very strong on animal welfare. I hate to see animals suffer under any circumstances. And frankly, I haven't met anybody who isn't appalled by those pictures of those sheep. I don't think anybody would find that acceptable. The question is, should we then shut an industry down on the grounds that nobody should eat sheep, nobody should use their skins for clothing, and that goes not only for Australians but for the people in the Middle East who are not that interested in our views here about their cultural practices.
They'll get their sheep from elsewhere anyway and treat them appallingly. So we might as well, the sheep might as well go there with us with some proper humane treatment rather than someone else who tortures them.
You're quite right. That's the animal welfare argument. That argument is based on the assumption that the welfare of sheep, not just Australian sheep, but all sheep, is important. And if we are to maximise welfare, if I can put it in those terms, for sheep in general, then they're better off coming from Australia, where, although we occasionally have shipments, such as the one that got on the TV, the Awassi Express, where things go wrong, and there are particular circumstances that led to that. And it was absolutely not representative. But even allowing for that, the fact is, if those countries, Kuwait, Doha, Qatar, and the rest of the Arab Middle East countries that buy our sheep, were to stop getting them from Australia because we shut the trade down, they would get them from countries which don't have anything like our welfare standards, and the net welfare situation for sheep would certainly not improve and quite likely deteriorate. So if you look at it from a welfare point of view, shutting down the trade would be bad for welfare. If you look at it from a rights point of view, then you can understand where they're coming from.
So as a vet, can you export live animals humanely if, we're talking about ventilation and stocking density? What about air conditioning, perhaps?
Well, we export racehorses, and other countries export racehorses or send racehorses to Australia, obviously, and they come here, they're perfectly live and in good health, and then they win all our prizes and take all our prize money away. So, exporting animals humanely, safely and all that sort of thing is clearly technically possible. The question is, can we do it economically and compete with other countries that would also like to have those customers? The answer is we are already doing that in the case of sheep to the Middle East, more than 99% of the time. There is no denying that the Middle East is very hot. Those countries in Doha, for example, or the countries around Doha, it can be very hot, up to 50 degrees, and also the humidity can go through the roof. I was there just last year with an ADF program, and boy, was it unpleasant. Now, if there is air circulating, it's not so bad. If the sheep aren't packed in too tight together, so they have an opportunity to cool down, it's all right, and as I said, more than 99% of the time they arrive in perfectly good health. You get a few deaths, but it's less than 0.5% that die in a typical journey. And frankly, most of the time the sheep gain weight on the trip, so that's a good sign that they're in good shape. And the death rate on farms is typically higher than it is on the ship. So if they had stayed back on the farm, probably in Western Australia, their chances of dying would probably be a little bit higher than if their chance of dying on the ship.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Look, I wanted to ask you about Section 44 of the Constitution. This this provision that has caught so many now Labor and formerly Coalition and Greens politicians for being dual citizens, and they've lost their jobs or had to recontest them. You're part of this committee, and I know the report is due out tomorrow looking into how possibly these problems could be alleviated in the future. And I know you can't talk about what is in the report, but what is your view about how we deal with this problem, and should we go to a referendum to try and change the Constitution? Well,
yes. In short, yes, I don't think there's any practical fix other than a change to the Constitution. The reason I say that is because we are essentially, at the moment, we are facing two classes of people who could represent us in Parliament. Now, I suppose if you say, well, I don't care, I hate politicians, and if some people can't be a politician or would find it, for all practical purposes, impossible to become a politician, that's their problem. I suppose you could say, well, the Constitution could stay as it is. But, democracy is an imperfect way of governing, but as Winston Churchill said, it's better than all the other ways we've tried. So, from my point of view, we have a responsibility to make our democracy as good as it can be. When you've got probably near enough to half the country who couldn't just stand for a by-election on relatively short notice, whereas the other half could do that, I think we have a problem. And we don't achieve anything in terms of a better government, a better democracy, by having half the country essentially ruled out, either because they're eligible to dual citizenship or because they have what's called an office of profit under the Crown. So they're a public servant, they might be a fireman, a nurse, a teacher.
Yeah, sure, but I mean, the rules are there for a reason. I don't think it's too much to expect that our elected representatives have allegiance only to Australia. And if you're a dual national, all you have to do is renounce your foreign citizenship. It's not that hard. I mean, Darren Hinch can do it, as he says it can't be that hard.
That's a hard argument to beat. If Darren Hinch could do it. But it actually is really, really hard for some people. And Sam Dastyari, for example, never succeeded. The Iranians just wouldn't allow him because he'd never done military service.
Yeah, but then he gets a leave pass with those countries that won't allow you. That's allowed. But if you're a New Zealander and you're just too your father was born in New Zealand and you're too sloppy to actually go and do something about it, well, do you really deserve to be an MP or deputy prime minister? Yes.
I mean, if everybody was. If all the dual citizens in Australia were either UK dual citizens or New Zealand dual citizens, then I suppose an argument could be made. Don't be an MP unless you're prepared to relinquish it. It's not that hard to relinquish it. Just get on and do it. Of course, that assumes that you know. So some people don't know their parents or their grandparents. Now, if one of your grandparents is Irish, and you don't know that, but it's found out later on, you might be an MP by that stage, then you've got a problem because you inherit Irish citizenship via your grandparents. Same if your grandparent is Polish. Now, if you know that, then you could take steps to relinquish it. If you don't know it, but you find out about it later, that's a problem. If the Polish government was to change its law so that you're eligible for Polish citizenship for a different reason, and you were already an MP, then you might still find yourself in trouble. In other words, it's up to the laws of other countries that influence whether or not you can remain eligible under the Constitution.
But, you've had to just explain to me at great length about this, and you haven't really convinced me. So I think that a referendum would be a very difficult ask, a lot of money and another fight that the government doesn't really need. So I'd be very interested to see what your committee has recommended when it comes out tomorrow. But thank you so much, David Leyonhjelm, again for your time.
My pleasure, Miranda.
And that's, of course...